This episode of the show is brought to you from the Salesman.org HubSpot studio. Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Like 70% of adults have dealt with this fear of being a fraud and imposter syndrome at some point in their careers. When you notice that fear, that anxiety starting to come up, just first stop. Take a deep breath, right? And notice and observe your feelings. There is so much that happens for so many people, hence why coaching and therapy is such a popular thing, right?
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron, and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have Michele Molitor. You can find out more about Michele over at michelemolitor.com. And on today's episode, we're getting into imposter syndrome, what it is, how to break through it, and a whole lot more. There's a ton of value in this episode. If you have ever tried to push your own comfort zone, your own boundaries and barriers, you'll have experienced imposter syndrome, I'm sure, many times over. And in today's episode, we're going to explain how to break through it. Everything that we're talking about in this episode is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And so with that said, let's jump right into it. Michele, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hey, great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. I'm glad to get into this conversation, which I think is going to seem nothing to do with sales, but we're going to drag it back into the world of sales, careers, goals, and aspirations in a second. But we're going to talk about imposter syndrome and hopefully, with your coaching and your guidance here, Michele, how we can break free of it. But with that said, is there a definition of what imposter syndrome is? What is it if people perhaps have experienced it, but they've not labeled it in the past?
Absolutely. Well, it's basically this overwhelming fear, this feeling of being a fraud, like, oh my gosh, they're going to find out I don't have all the answers. I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. They made a mistake in giving me this raise or this promotion or hiring me. And right, it's a level of anxiety that is keeping people kind of hiding out and fearful that they're going to make a wrong step and the whole thing is going to fall apart.
And is this typically acute in that, I've been asked to do this meeting and it turns out the past 20 years of my career, I've just been BSing, I have no idea what's going on? Or is it less acute in that this can happen for weeks, years, decades until kind of either we collapse and break down or we change paths at the end of it?
It's a little bit of both. It's something that both men and women suffer from. Like 70% of adults have dealt with this fear of being a fraud and imposter syndrome at some point in their careers. And it can creep in slowly and it can blow up and take over if you're not careful. You know, in my former career, I was a creative director in web development, and I got picked from a nationwide search. And I was moved from Atlanta to San Francisco at the height of the dot-com boom. And I had a golden ticket. It was going to be so exciting. And I was like, they picked me. Like I was shocked and amazed and delighted all at the same time that they had moved me and entrusted me with this position in this, .com company. It was just about to IPO. And all along, I was paddling like hell underneath the surface, trying to make sure that I was getting it all right. And I looked like I had all the answers. And so that, in hindsight, I was like, oh, yeah, I was suffering from a huge case of imposter syndrome. And ultimately, that fear, along with two folks that I hired, I kind of got bullied out of my job. So it ended up being this giant hot mess. But it was ultimately a gift because it led me to my true life's calling. So that I share that with you because it's some people, it's something that comes in and then it leaves again. And other people, it comes and stays and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you're like, oh, I got to deal with this and I got to deal with it now.
For sure. And I'll just give down an anecdote from my side here. And this episode is timely for me because I'm feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome at the moment. So the audience may know this, Michele, but I'll lay it out for yourself as well. I started this podcast on the back of working a B2B sales role, medical device sales. I looked out in the marketplace, essentially Google, and there was no good sales training content. It was all weird, wacky content from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s that was totally out of date. And if I tried to do any of it with one of the surgeons that I was selling to, they would have just looked at me weirdly and told me to get lost, and I would never have been allowed back in that operating room again. So I was like, right, I'm going to start the podcast. I'm pretty good at sales. I'm not an A-class player, but I'm probably a B plus, and I'm going to learn, and I hopefully can share some insights via the podcast and interviewing experts in different subject matters like yourself. And that was fine. And then the podcast grew and grew and grew. And now it's I guess we'd put it, it's a large business podcast, but it's tiny compared to other podcasts out there in the non-business world. So it has a little bit of an audience. Now, I'm feeling slightly imposter syndrome right this second because we've just started 3 big research projects that are costing me and the business a crap ton of just capital, mind share and energy. And I'm feeling an imposter syndrome because we're going to come out of the back of these, hopefully, with some really interesting findings. And the company is starting to pivot slightly towards more of a research company and a training company versus the media company what it was. So I, as the kind of head of the organization, is shifting from this lanky dude kind of slurring his words on a podcast into hopefully running an organization can really have an impact with our own unique insights into the B2B buyer and seller marketplace. And I feel like I'm kind of in between both of them, right? I feel like if I started pitching you on, we've done this research, Michele, and we've got this, and this, the audience and yourself, maybe not yourself because we don't know each other too well, but the audience might be, hey, you were just joking on the podcast a week ago about something so stupid and daft. How are we meant to take you seriously? So I feel like I'm in this area of imposter syndrome here. And why I wanted to highlight that anecdote in particular was it seemed like your anecdote of imposter syndrome was they picked me. Oh, crap, I've got to do this. Whereas mine is 100% self-imposed. Whether it's my subconscious, whatever it is pushing me this direction, and my conscious brain is tattling behind it, going, hey, I'm not sure if I'm capable of doing some of this. Does that make any sense? What I just threw at you there, Michele?
Oh, it makes total sense. I'm laughing over here because similarly different, Dave. Last year in my COVID holiday, I decided to create, because I do coaching and consulting, right? So there's a whole nother arm to my business that is consulting, and I decided to create a whole employee well-being program for corporations. And so I have a wee bit of that same thing happening, like, okay, I can sell this one-on-one, but selling to corporations, that's a different mindset. And so there's a part of me that's being all wobbly about it, right? And so I've taught myself, dive into the deep end of the pool and figure it out, right? So for me, writing about my own fears of imposter syndrome that happened to me 20 years ago, but still creep in from time to time, is the best way that I know to like get over myself, like keep doing what I know that I'm here to do, and that I know that I can do, and I know that you.
Yeah, so I do a similar thing. I guess I'm doing it literally right now. I'm sharing it on the podcast, and maybe there's a bit of therapy that goes on inadvertently through me talking to people and on the show. So you can tell me off there at the end of it whether you want to charge me for coaching and consoling and consulting at the back of it. But with that, Michele, I guess for the audience to make it really relevant for B2B sales, when I worked in that B2B sales role, I found this imposter syndrome whenever I would do a deal size that would be bigger than what my usual deal would be. And I don't know who's come up with this, but I've got this kind of metaphor in my head of salespeople tend to have this wealth, we call it a wealth thermostat. So if you're used to doing deal sizes between 10 and 50 grand, great, you get in, it's all unconsciously competent. You can make the calls, you can do the emails, you're used to speaking to perhaps not the executive suite, but the people below them, higher the middle management, you're used to speaking to the end users, and everything's fine, great. But then every now and again, that big opportunity comes and the CFO is sitting there and you're like, I don't know how to speak to a CFO. And you start to, they become less of a person and more of this just beast that at any moment could throw a load of gobbledygook your way.
Booming title. It's the CFO.
Exactly,
Like, no, it's a human being who puts his pants on one leg at a time, right?
But how do we tell ourselves that, whether it's in the moment or before a meeting, how do we convince ourselves that it is just a person? And they're probably just as nervous to talk to you because they don't know that you know more about your product or service than what they do. We've talked about what imposter syndrome is. How do we now pivot to how do we get over it? How do we dive in the deep end, as you suggested earlier?
Sure. Well, the first thing is when you notice that fear, that anxiety starting to come up, just first stop. Take a deep breath, right? And notice and observe your feelings and where is that stress or anxiety in your body, right? Your body has a wealth of information for you, right? So then you get to be your own little coach, right? Like, okay, I'm having a conversation with another human being and we're talking about something that I know and love, right? And that they're interested in because if they weren't, they wouldn't have called me or they wouldn't have invited me to meet with them, right? And I'm just going to listen to their challenges and their problems, and we're going to problem solve and see if the solutions that I have are going to meet them where they are with their problem, right? It's just that simple. But when we get caught in the space of, I'm going to talk to the CFO of blah, blah, blah company, and oh my gosh, there's all this stuff, but it's all based on assumptions and things. I mean, there's of course facts behind the company does X millions of dollars in business and they have these many employees and yada, yada, yada. However, you're still simply just talking one person to another person. And when you can bring it back in to that narrow scope versus all this other noise, head noise, right, that your fears are making. Well, what if and oh, blah, 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 right? You're just like, let me just breathe and regroup and recruit. Now, if this anxiety happens frequently, one of my favorite things that I recommend to my clients is create a journal. Oh, I don't have it handy. But anyway, you can get a little paper journal, right? And call it your wins journal. And so every time you have a win, small, medium, or large, write it down, right? Like, woohoo, celebrate. Today I talked with John Doe at Google, and he's always super excited about bringing our stuff into his company, right? Write that down. So when you do get caught in these anxious moments, go back to your wins journal, like, oh, yeah, that happened. That was real. And oh, and that happened. And that was real, right? Reminding yourself that you are good at what you do. You are enough. You've got this. And now you're just perhaps stretching outside the edge of your comfort zone, which is creating that wobble, that uncomfortableness that for me it happens as tingling in the top of my head when I stretch before past the edge of my comfort zone. And so just notice it. And the thing is, it's just energy. That fear, that angst, it's just energy and it's looking for a place to go. So get up, create a pattern interrupt for yourself. So dance it out, right? Put on some fun music, go for a walk outside, talk to the trees, say hello to the birds, whatever works for you, right? But it's just about shifting and bringing yourself back into the present moment so you're not letting your fears run away with you.
How much, because this goes way beyond imposter syndrome here, how much does this time that we spend either looking into the past that we can't change or making assumptions and then looking into the future on the basis of assumptions that we don't know to be true, how much of it, regardless of imposter syndrome here, how much of that process holds people back from actually getting over what's happened in the past and taking the correct actions to move forward and to have more success in their lives kind of moving forward with things?
Lord of mercy. Well, there is so much that happens for so many people, hence why coaching and therapy is such a popular thing, right? Because it's very easy to get caught in either one of those places. And why mindfulness meditation, for example, is something that has become more and more mainstream because it's all about bringing yourself back into the now moment and not making those assumptions about the future or reliving the fears of the past. Because those old tapes is what keeps us stuck, right? You know, at the heart of my work is really helping people tap into those old beliefs that they hold about themselves that are locked in their subconscious mind that they don't even know that they have oftentimes because they were implanted in childhood, right? So when you can start to recognize those fears when they're coming up and get curious with it, like, I wonder what that's really about, or where is that coming from? Is that my fear, or is that something that maybe my parents handed to me, or my siblings, or a teacher, or one of my friends, right? As a kid, we take on beliefs because we're just big sponges, right? We just take in information. And the environment that you grow up in, good, bad, or ugly, lays the foundation for how you will perceive the world and the blinders that you carry for yourself, right? That you don't even know that you have, right? So if you were told inadvertently or in a direct way as a kid, oh, you're not good enough. Who are you? What were you thinking? Right? You'll start to take on those beliefs, and that can shrink your perspective smaller and smaller as you go through your adult life, thus creating that back and forth that happens of moving, trying to be in the future or living in the past versus just staying present.
For sure. We can go as deep as you like here, Michele, because I love this, right? I love these conversations. So there's two things here. One, there's a ton of data that shows that most people, when we talked about the wealth thermostat earlier in the conversation about business, most people earn between plus or minus 20% of what their parents earned. So you get accustomed to a certain lifestyle. You get accustomed to, we can't afford that. We can afford that. At Christmas, we must have this. We can't do that. And so you're right in the fact that we're being wired, so the wiring goes so deep and ingrained into us that sometimes it can be difficult to change. So we'll touch on how to perhaps change some of this in a second, or at least become aware of it maybe. And then the other thing, which I find fascinating, is when you look at the data on eyewitness testimony of crimes when it goes to court, we're terrible at remembering things. So we think we've got these memories of people saying this, doing that, and they're probably not accurate at all in the first place. So we're holding ourselves back on these, what we think are real memories that we've replayed and twisted and turned over the years or decades. And that's now shaping our future. And if we can twist them and shape them to be positive, clearly we're going to increase our chances of success. But most people, and myself in the past, right, I've had thoughts and feelings of not being able to do this or not being able to do that. As we discussed at the top of the show, I don't feel like I'm perhaps worthy of talking about research that we're conducting. And who's my company to say we know this and this and this about the marketplace, when I'm happy to have guests on the show to tell me the perhaps the same facts. So there's all kinds of things to go out here. So Michele, how do we get over this, right? If we have, I guess, how do we identify when it's wiring that we need to rewire? And how do we then perhaps change some of this wiring in the short time period that we have?
Yes, absolutely. Well, the first thing is to notice, is there a disempowering thought that keeps popping up, replaying in your mind that's holding you back, right? I'm not good enough. Success isn't available to me. I'm different. Who am I? They're not going to listen to me. I don't deserve to be here. Any of those ramblings of your amygdala, which is your fight or flight mechanism, that's just literally trying to keep you safe and alive and on the planet, right? I like to call her Amy. Amy's the little lizard lady in your limbic brain, right? And Amy just wants to keep you safe, right? And she's the one chittering in your ear. I'm not good enough. I'm not perfect. Other people are better than me, blah, blah, blah. So notice that. And then say, thank you for sharing, Amy. I've got this, right? Now, the tricky part is because these beliefs are often hardwired at a subconscious level, it's very, very challenging to get at them consciously, right? Talk therapy, coaching, they all have their place, but they're still dealing with things at a conscious mind level. So the work that I do is called rapid transformational therapy. And it's a unique combination that brings together cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, and hypnosis combined with coaching to create this holistic supportive process over 30 to 90 days, right? So in the heart of the work, I'm able to literally talk to your subconscious mind to help you identify what are the root causes, the root events that had you start believing that you weren't enough, that you didn't belong, that you weren't lovable, that you couldn't be successful, whatever that tape is that's playing in your head. And we literally can rewrite it, because what I do is I help them neutralize the old belief, the disempowering belief, and then we plug in a new belief. Well, how would you like it to be? How would you like to feel? How would you have liked that scene to have looked? And we're literally rewriting over those memories because your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and imagined in a state of hypnosis, right? So we use that to our benefit. And then I take all of those data points that I've learned in our discovery session, and I weave that into what I call my transformation recording. And that is it's essentially a guided hypnosis recording. I mix in binaural music, and they listen to that recording every day as they drift off to sleep for 30 days because your mind likes repetition, right? So the more you listen to it as you're drifting off, your brain's always listening and taking in the information. Just like listening to a song on the radio, you know the words 30 years later, right? So it's the same thing. We're literally building new neural pathways around these new beliefs, these new habits, which then allows you to move forward powerfully, taking off the blinders of fear and doubt, and create new habits for success that creates massive shifts for people in a very short period of time.
If we've established that people's negative beliefs in the past don't need to be real to have an effect on the person in the present and in the future, do the beliefs that perhaps someone like yourself hit with hypnotism, NLP, different kind of modalities of therapy, right? Does it matter whether the beliefs that you would instill in someone, there's an ethical thing here that we'll perhaps touch on in a second, but do they need to be real? In that, what I'm saying is, can you, if we went at this long enough, can you convince me that I am an incredible podcaster, I'm charismatic, I'm this and that, which then perhaps would lead to that happening in reality, even though it's not true right now?
Well, reality is subjective, right? I can tell you that you're a great podcasting host, right? But you might not believe me because of your imposter syndrome going on, right? So I would say it's more about eliminating the barriers or taking off the blinders that has you think that I'm okay, but I'm not an A grade, like what you said earlier. I'm guessing you're a lot better than what you give yourself credit for, which is at the heart of imposter syndrome, right? Well, I did okay. Folks with imposter syndrome, they chalk it up to luck, being in the right place at the right time. Oh, I knew so-and-so who got me into this. And I just I lucked out, right? No, you created this based on your brilliance, your talent, your expertise, right? And so everybody should stop and take a moment and sit back and go, look what I made. Like, give yourself a pat on the back. It's not from a place of ego, but just from a place of noticing what's so, right? Mm-hmm. And then amplifying that through the work that I do, right? So taking you from good to great is a matter of shifting your perspectives about yourself, right? And then continuing to believe in that, right? When I discovered this work, I didn't even know that I had a deeply held belief that I wasn't enough. I was so fearful of not being good enough, being judged, and being kicked to the curb, right? And when I discovered that belief, I literally would just start repeating to myself, I am enough, I am enough, I am enough. And I would drive down the road to my appointments and I would sing this weird little not good tune. Like it's my I'm enough song, right? Because the more you say it, the more you're strengthening those neural pathways until one day I was like, well, yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. And it finally sank in enough for me to get it, where it was true all along, but I didn't believe that was true. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I guess where I want to go from here is, how do we know what the limits are with this? What I mean by that is, we talked about stretching our boundaries, our comfort zone, and clearly we want to do that regularly, because then what is challenging right now is going to be easy in the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, however it takes to stretch that comfort zone and kind of cement the next board that we want to kind of break through. But Clearly, if I had a similarly out of tune song like yourself, Michele, that said, I'm black, I'm 7'3", and I'm going to play in the NBA, it's probably not the most productive song to have, right? Because it's not going to lead to anything. It's physically impossible with the medical technology that we have now that could even happen in our lifetime, right? So how do we know when we should be, I guess, almost faking it to make it to a certain extent? And how do we know when we are just kind of wasting energy on something that is never going to happen?
Well, you have to be realistic. I'm not going to morph into a 6'7" black man. That's just beyond, physical reality as we understand it. And so you got to take these things with a grain of salt. And that's where outside counsel,
sure,
coaches, mentors, friends, family come in and go, Dave, you're a great guy, but you're never going to morph into a 6'7" black man. I'm really sorry to tell you that, right? And you're like, oh, okay, dang. So you got to have those voices of reality around you and lean into mentors, coaches, friends and family who are gonna, hey, you got this green stuff in your teeth, right? You got to be alerted to what works and what doesn't work sometimes, and to help you also remove those blinders.
Sure. And I guess what you're describing there as well, very literally can be applicable if we have an imposter syndrome about this big deal that we're doing. We need to speak to someone within the organization, perhaps our own CFO, who used to work in sales, or CEO, whoever it is. We need to ask them these questions so they can paint a picture and share the reality that they went through where, hey, it probably isn't such a big deal as what you're making out right now. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's a great point. Find someone who is, by whatever measurable standards are in the position that is stretching you, who's maybe smarter, more successful, has more experience, whatever, and ask them questions. How would you approach this? What advice can you give me? What landmines should I avoid? Right? Because we can't understand the experience of others that is so far outside of our own experience, right? So talking to people who have different experiences is going to give us different perspectives so that you can go from I don't know what I don't know to I know what I don't know, so that I can get to I know what I know, right?
So the answer to this question is hire Michele and go to your website and book in a call, right? But other than that, which we'll come on to in a second, we've covered finding mentors. We've covered understanding in the moment if you're feeling that imposter syndrome, where to take that energy somewhere else, and whether you go for a run around the block or whatever it is, get it out of kind of fight or flight and into something more productive. We've touched on kind of like some of the therapeutic side of things, whether it's NLP, hypnosis, cognitive behavioral therapy. Is there anything else that we should be doing, or is there any other modals of therapy or whatever it is to accelerate some of this process? Is there anything else that we can do if we're feeling imposter syndrome and we've ticked all those boxes? Is there anything else that we've missed that we should add into the conversation?
Well, it's about being brave enough to take the step forward to ask for help, right? Whether it's from me or other people, being able to ask for help is a huge step. From a professional, I'm not going to ask anybody for any help, getting over myself kind of person, right? It took me a long time to do that. So really, by taking that next step of asking for help, so you can get that outside perspective to help you see the thing that you can't see that's stuck on the end of your nose, is the first step in creating a quantum leap in your life and in your success, because we're all in this together. We can't do it by ourselves, literally, right? So that's an important thing to remember. And if your ego gets all up in arms about that, say thank you for sharing. And it's okay. We can, humble ourselves and get the help that we need to then be a better person by expanding our emotional intelligence and letting go of some of the fears and the worries and the anxiety that's been, holding you back for way too long.
Have you read the book or come across the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway?
Yes.
So that book describes some of what you're, in my experience when I read it like 10 years ago now, but that did a lot of what you're describing there. It allowed me and essentially told me, it was almost like a coaching session. I think that is the author Susan Jeffries, I might get that wrong. I'll link it in the show notes to this episode. It was almost like a coaching session via paper saying, hey, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to feel fearful. I think you used the word brave. It's okay to feel like you need to be brave in a moment and then break through it. And it's my experience, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Michele, and we'll wrap up with this. It's my experience that a lot of the time, the moments I have to feel brave, the moments I feel fear and have to break through it, it's almost like a snap decision, as opposed to, it might be a long process of getting to that moment, but it's not something that, when you've made that decision, it's not something that tends to last for minutes, hours, weeks, or days. Is that something that you experience as well, whether yourself and your clients, in that a lot of these breakthroughs and a lot of these decisions happen in that click, in that snap?
Oftentimes, yes. It's the moment where they make the choice to move through it. But then there's also Amy who comes back around and like, are you sure you want to do that? I don't know about that. You should think that you should second guess yourself, right? So that's where the backpedaling comes in. But, true story here. Years ago, I was working on a big project, right? And I was sitting there at my desk, and the top of my head starts tingling, and I'm like squirming in my seat, and I had this giant urge to get up and go get a snack, right? And I caught myself, and I was like, oh, wait. That's just the edge of my comfort zone. So now I recognize when the top of my head tingles, instead of going and get a snack, I'm like, oh, things get uncomfortable. Keep going, right? Because that's just the way to move through and to stretch and grow to a new place. And that's what I want. I think that's what you want. I think that's what most people want, is they want to be able to stretch and grow. And it's just that edge of your comfort zone gets really squirmy, and you're like, oh, look at that energy. Be curious with yourself. Notice that energy all squirming around in my body. Okay, let me go do something with that. And then I can get back and focus on the task at hand.
It's interesting because I wouldn't say I get that energy as you're describing it, but what I get is this massive urge to procrastinate, to just go, okay, maybe we'll do that. I think I want to do that, but we'll do it in 7 years from now, as opposed to just sending the email, making the call, doing whatever it is. And the way I get over that 9 times out of 10, I suggest maybe my Amy. What's the male equivalent of Amy? I've got Army, whoever in the back of my brain is probably causing the procrastination.
Arnold, we'll call him Arnold.
I've got Big Arnold. Big Arnold in the background, and causing me all these pains and frustrations, Michele. And what I do is I ask the question, I guess, to that voice. I just asked the question, what would a champion do? This is something that someone told me on. It was like one of the first episodes of the podcast. He's won tons and tons of triathlons and ultramarathons and things, this chap. And he said he asked himself the question, what would a champion do? So I copied that, and I say that all the time. And that will get another hour's work out of me. It'll get me to send that email. It'll get me to make that call. All because I go, well, maybe I'm going backwards about this. You'd coach me otherwise, but maybe I think, well, I'm not worthy of whatever it is that I'm procrastinating right now, but a champion would do it, and I aspire to be a champion for whatever that means. And so I'm gonna make those changes and make those moves.
I love that. I'm going to borrow that from you.
It's okay. I stole it from someone else. The audience can steal it as well.
Anyway, right?
Well, with that, Michele, tell us where we can find more about you and more about the services and the training that you offer as well.
Sure. I invite you all to come visit me at michelemolitor.com, Michelemolitor.com. Happy to have a complimentary discovery call with folks and find out more about what's challenging them and how I can be of service. And I've got a bunch of free stuff there. You can go to the brain candy section on my website, and I've got a masterclass on conquering fear and anxiety. I've got a whole bunch of stuff up there for you. So check it out. And I would love to be of service if I can.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Michele, I had a blast. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It was a delight to be here with you. Well, I appreciate it.